2 years after the destruction of New Terra Colony, the Galactic Empire was dying from within. What had begun as isolated terrorist attacks had evolved into a systematic campaign of psychological warfare that was tearing apart the Imperial command structure. Ghostwalker had become a legend whispered in fearful tones throughout Zephyrian space. A human demon who could appear anywhere and strike down even the most heavily protected officers. The numbers told the story of the Empire's decline. 47 senior Imperial officers had been assassinated, including 6 admirals, 12 fleet commanders, and 29 installation commanders. 3 major naval bases had been destroyed, along with their entire complements of ships and personnel. Supply lines throughout the outer sectors had been disrupted by constant attacks that appeared to come from nowhere and vanish without trace, but the real damage was psychological. The Imperial officer corps, once proud and arrogant in their assumed superiority, had become paralyzed by fear. Promotions were refused rather than accepted, as senior positions were seen as death sentences. Fleet deployments were delayed or canceled as commanders made excuses to avoid independent operations. The mighty Zephyrian war machine was grinding to a halt because its leaders were afraid to leave their heavily defended bunkers. Marcus Chion stood in the observation deck of the Wraith, studying intelligence reports from across Imperial space. His campaign of vengeance had achieved results beyond his wildest expectations, but the list of targets from Admiral Kresh's files was far from exhausted. There were still dozens of officers responsible for human genocide. Still military installations that supported the Empire's campaign of terror against civilian populations. More importantly, the Zephyrians had learned nothing from their losses. Even as their officer corps was systematically eliminated, Imperial forces continued to conduct demonstration operations against human settlements. Just last week, they had destroyed a research station in the Kepler sector, killing 300 scientists and their families to send a message about human technical advancement. The genocidal machinery of the Empire continued to function. Driven by institutional hatred that went deeper than individual commanders, Marcus had initially planned to limit his campaign to the specific officers responsible for his son's deaths. But the scope of Imperial atrocities had forced him to expand his mission. Every dead Zephyrian officer was replaced by another who continued the same policies, perpetuating a cycle of violence that could only be broken by more drastic measures. The Empire's entire leadership structure would have to be eliminated before the killing of human civilians would stop. The target that would accomplish this goal was Emperor Throne World, the capital of the Galactic Empire and seat of the Imperial Ruling Council. The planet was protected by defenses that made Fortress Prime look like an unguarded outpost, with orbital platforms, energy shields, and fleet formations that could destroy entire star systems. It was considered the most secure location in the galaxy, which made it the ultimate test of Ghostwalker's capabilities. Marcus began his final approach to the throne world through a route that existed only in theoretical studies of Imperial defenses. The planet's massive defensive grid had a single weakness that few strategists had ever identified. It was designed to repel external attacks rather than infiltration by vessels already inside the defensive perimeter. A ship that could avoid detection while crossing the outer boundaries would have relatively easy access to the planet's surface. The Wraith slipped through the defensive grid like a ghost passing through walls, its adaptive camouflage and stealth systems, rendering it invisible to sensors that were focused on detecting large-scale military formations. Marcus landed the ship in a cargo facility on the planet's surface, where it would remain hidden among thousands of other civilian vessels. Until his mission was complete, the Imperial Palace sat at the center of the throne world's primary continent, a massive structure that housed the Emperor and the ruling council that governed the galaxy's most powerful military force. The palace was protected by energy barriers, automated defense systems, and an army of elite guards who had never failed to protect their charges. It was considered absolutely impregnable, which was exactly why Marcus had chosen it as his final target. The infiltration took weeks of patient preparation. As Marcus studied the palace's defenses and identified routes through its massive structure, the building was a city in itself, housing tens of thousands of Imperial personnel across hundreds of levels and sections. Security was intense but predictable, following patterns that could be learned and exploited by someone with enough time and determination. Marcus began his assault in the palace's lower levels, systematically eliminating security personnel and planting charges throughout the facility's infrastructure. Each death was carefully planned to avoid detection. Bodies positioned to appear as if they had died from natural causes or accidents. The Imperial Guards never realized they were under attack until it was far too late to mount an effective defense. The Emperor himself was the final target. An ancient Zephyrian who had ruled the galaxy for over a century through fear and brutality. He lived in chambers at the palace's highest level, protected by barriers that could withstand direct assault from orbital weapons. No assassin had ever penetrated his defenses, no enemy had ever threatened his personal safety. He believed himself untouchable, beyond the reach of any force in the galaxy. Marcus appeared in the Imperial throne room like death incarnate, materializing from shadow to stand before the most powerful being in known space. The Emperor stared at the armored human figure with a mixture of recognition and disbelief, understanding at last that his empire's greatest enemy had come to claim the ultimate prize. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "I am Marcus Chun, father of Tommy, Jake, and Sam Chun. Your forces murdered them 2 years ago. I have come to collect payment for their lives, and for the lives of every human your empire has slaughtered." The Emperor's death was swift but symbolic, carried out with weapons taken from human colonies that had been destroyed in Imperial demonstrations. Marcus left the alien ruler's body displayed on the throne as a message to anyone who might find him, a reminder that no amount of power could protect those who murdered innocents. As the charges detonated throughout the Imperial Palace, reducing the center of galactic government to rubble and flame, Marcus Chen stood in the ruins and thought of his sons. Tommy, Jake, and Sam would never come home from the wheat fields, would never grow up to have families of their own. But their deaths had not been in vain. The empire that killed them was collapsing, its leadership dead and its military paralyzed by fear. The Galactic Empire had made a fatal mistake when they murdered 3 human boys without considering who their father might be. They had awakened something terrible, a reminder that humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy when they had nothing left to lose. The war they thought was over had been reborn in the heart of a grieving father, and it would not end until justice was finally served. Marcus Chun walked away from the burning palace and disappeared into the night, another ghost in the darkness carrying the hopes of humanity and the promise of vengeance fulfilled. The empire was dead, killed by its own cruelty and the determination of one man who refused to let his children's murders go unanswered. In the end, that had been enough to change the galaxy forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of New Terra Colony as Marcus Chun finished his daily inspection of the perimeter fences. The former U.S. Marine had traded his combat boots for farming equipment 15 years ago, but his eyes still swept the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a soldier. This remote agricultural world on the edge of known space had become his sanctuary, a place where the ghosts of his past couldn't find him. His 3 sons were already up, working alongside the automated harvesters that moved like gentle giants through the golden grain. Tommy, 18 and eager to prove himself, operated the largest harvester with surprising skill. The twins, Jake and Sam, both 16, raced their smaller maintenance drones between the crop rows, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. They were good boys, strong and honest, shaped by the frontier life that demanded self-reliance and hard work from everyone. Marcus paused to watch them, a rare smile crossing his weathered face. These boys knew nothing of the wars he had fought among distant stars, nothing of the alien species he had battled in the name of human expansion. To them, he was simply Dad, the man who taught them to fix machinery, tend crops, and shoot straight when the local wildlife got too curious about their livestock. The Galactic Empire's influence barely reached this far, and that suited Marcus perfectly. The peace shattered when the sky began to burn. 3 massive Imperial dreadnoughts materialized above New Terra Colony. their obsidian hulls blocking out portions of the sun. The ships were each the size of a city, bristling with weapon arrays that could crack planets in half. Their arrival sent shockwaves through the atmosphere, causing the harvester windows to rattle and birds to flee in panicked clouds from the surrounding forests. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. He knew those ships, knew the symbols that marked their hulls. The Zephyrian Imperial Fleet, the iron fist of the Galactic Empire's most ruthless species. The lizard-like Zephyrians had been humanity's enemies during the Border Wars, a conflict that had ended in an uneasy ceasefire rather than true peace. What were they doing here in neutral space? The answer came swift and brutal. Beam weapons lanced down from the ships, not at military targets or infrastructure, but at the scattered farmsteads that dotted the colony's surface. The Zephyrians were conducting what they called a demonstration of authority, a practice designed to remind lesser species of their place in the galactic hierarchy. To them, humans were barely above animals, useful only as laborers and test subjects. Marcus grabbed his communicator and tried to reach his sons, but the Imperial ships were jamming all frequencies. He watched in growing horror as distant explosions bloomed across the landscape, each one marking the death of families he had known for over a decade. The Zephyrians were being systematic, methodical, destroying every human settlement they could detect from orbit. A beam struck the main harvester where Tommy was working. The machine exploded in a brilliant fireball, vaporizing everything within 50 meters. Marcus ran toward the explosion site, his heart pounding with desperate hope, but he already knew what he would find. Nothing remained of his eldest son except a crater in the earth and twisted metal fragments scattered across the scorched soil. The twins were next. Jake and Sam had abandoned their drones and were running toward the farmhouse when another orbital strike found them. Marcus saw the flash of light, saw his boys disappear in an instant of searing energy, and something fundamental broke inside him. They had been laughing just moments before, racing their drones through the crops like any normal day. Now they were gone, erased as if they had never existed. The Zephyrian fleet finished their demonstration within an hour, leaving New Terra Colony a smoking wasteland littered with the bodies of 3,000 human colonists. As the ships prepared to depart, their commanders were undoubtedly pleased with their efficiency. They had sent a clear message to any human settlements that dared to exist beyond Imperial territory. Submit or die. What they didn't know was that they had just murdered the children of Marcus Chun, a man who had spent 12 years perfecting the art of killing aliens in the name of human survival. They didn't know about his service record, his medals, or the classified operations that had earned him the nickname Ghost Walker among his fellow Marines. They had no idea that the broken farmer kneeling in the ashes of his son's grave site had once single-handedly destroyed an entire Zephyrian command post and walked away without a scratch. As the Imperial ships vanished into hyperspace, Marcus Chen stood amid the ruins of his life and felt something cold and familiar awakening in his chest. The peaceful farmer was gone, burned away with his children. In his place stood a weapon that the galaxy had foolishly forgotten, a reminder of why humanity had earned its place among the stars through blood and determination rather than diplomacy. The Zephyrians had made their biggest mistake in centuries. They had awakened a sleeping monster, and Marcus Chun was going to teach them exactly why humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy when they had nothing left to lose. The war they thought was over was about to begin again. But this time it would be personal, intimate, and absolutely without mercy. Marcus walked back to his farmhouse, past the crater where Tommy had died, past the scorched earth where the twins had fallen. In his basement workshop, hidden beneath farming equipment and spare parts, lay his old military gear. It was time to remember who he used to be before he became a father. It was time to show the Galactic Empire what happened when they killed the wrong man's children. The basement beneath Marcus Chen's farmhouse had been sealed for 15 years, hidden behind a false wall that looked like nothing more than storage space for old farming equipment. As Marcus activated the biometric locks with his palm print, the wall slid away to reveal a chamber that belonged to another life entirely. The air inside was stale but dry, preserved by military-grade environmental systems that had kept his equipment in perfect condition. Row upon row of weapons lined the walls, each one a masterpiece of human engineering designed specifically for warfare against alien species. Pulse rifles calibrated for Zephyrian physiology hung beside plasma charges that could melt through Imperial armor. Combat armor that had saved his life dozens of times waited on its mounting rack, the matte black surface still bearing scorch marks from battles fought in distant star systems. Marcus ran his fingers along the suit's chest plate, remembering the weight of it, the way it had become like a second skin during his years of service. The armor's integrated systems came online at his touch, recognizing his biometrics and displaying tactical information on the heads-up display. Power levels were optimal, weapon systems fully functional, stealth generators ready for activation. It was as if the suit had been waiting for him to return. In the center of the chamber sat his most prized possession, a modified infiltration ship called the Wraith. No larger than a civilian transport, the vessel was packed with experimental technology that had been declared too dangerous for standard military use. Adaptive camouflage that could make it invisible to most sensors, a propulsion system that left no energy signature, and weapons that could punch holes through Imperial shielding. The ship had been his personal project during his final years of service, a ghost that could strike anywhere without warning. As Marcus began the process of suiting up, muscle memory took over. Each piece of armor locked into place with satisfying clicks, synthetic fibers bonding with his nervous system to provide enhanced strength and reflexes. The helmet's neural interface awakened dormant combat protocols in his brain, flooding his consciousness with tactical data and target recognition patterns. For the first time in 15 years, he felt complete. The transformation went beyond the physical equipment. With each piece of armor that locked into place, the grieving father receded, and the weapon emerged. Marcus Chin had been one of the most effective solo operators in human military history, a specialist in deep infiltration and asymmetric warfare. His service record was classified so heavily that most of his fellow Marines had never known his true capabilities. He had been the ghost in the dark that Zephyrian commanders feared, the human who could appear anywhere in their territory and disappear before they could respond. During the border wars, entire Imperial installations had simply vanished overnight, their personnel found dead at their posts with no indication of how the attacker had penetrated their defenses. The Zephyrians had posted massive bounties for his capture, not realizing that Ghost Walker was a single human rather than a special forces unit. The Wraith's engines hummed to life as Marcus completed his pre-flight checks, each system responding with mechanical precision. He had maintained the ship religiously over the years, telling his sons it was just a hobby project, an old transport he was restoring. They had helped him polish its hull and organize its cargo bay, never suspecting they were assisting with the maintenance of one of the most dangerous weapons in human space. Marcus plotted a course toward the nearest Zephyrian trade route, a busy hyperspace corridor where Imperial merchant vessels carried luxury goods between their core worlds. The military might be out of reach for now, but the Empire's economy depended on constant commerce flowing between their colonies. Disrupting that commerce would send a message that someone was fighting back, and more importantly, it would provide him with the resources he needed for larger operations. The ship's computer had maintained detailed files on Zephyrian military organization, updated through automated intelligence, gathering networks that Marcus had never quite disconnected. He studied the data as the Wraith slipped into hyperspace, planning his approach with the cold calculation of a professional killer. The Zephyrians were creatures of habit, following predictable patterns that made them vulnerable to the right kind of pressure. Imperial merchant vessels traveled in convoys protected by light warships, but their escort patterns hadn't changed significantly since the border wars. They still assumed that humans were bound by conventional military thinking, that any attack would come from heavily armed fleets engaging in direct combat. They had no protocols for dealing with a single infiltrator who could appear inside their defensive perimeter without warning. As the stars wheeled past outside the cockpit, Marcus felt the familiar clarity of purpose that had sustained him through years of warfare. The grief was still there, burning in his chest like a physical wound, but it had been forged into something useful. Every Zephyrian who died would be payment for his sons' lives. Every Imperial ship destroyed would be a step toward justice for New Terra colony. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with broken farmers and scattered colonists. Easy prey for their demonstration of power? They were about to learn that they had awakened something far more dangerous than an army. They had created an enemy who had nothing left to lose, no constraints of politics or military hierarchy to limit his actions. Marcus Chun was no longer bound by rules of engagement or concern for diplomatic consequences. He was a father seeking vengeance, armed with the skills and equipment to wage war against an entire empire. The Zephyrians had killed his children, thinking themselves safe in their ships and stations. They were wrong. No distance would protect them, no armor would save them, no number of guards would stop him. He was coming for them all, one by one, and he would not stop until every Zephyrian involved in the attack on New Terra colony was dead. The first convoy would be just the beginning. The Zephyrian merchant convoy moved through hyperspace like a parade of wealth and power. 17 massive cargo vessels escorted by 4 Imperial frigates. Each transport carried precious metals, exotic spices, and luxury goods worth billions of credits, flowing from the rim worlds toward the Empire's core systems. The convoy's commander, Captain Voss, lounged in his command chair with the confidence of someone who had never faced a real threat. The escort frigates maintained a standard diamond formation around the merchant ships, their sensors sweeping space for conventional threats. Pirates occasionally attacked Imperial convoys, but they used stolen warships and crude tactics that were easily defeated by trained military crews. The idea that a single small vessel might pose any danger to 17 ships and their escort never occurred to the Zephyrian officers. Marcus Chun studied the convoy from a distance of 50,000 kilometers. His ship invisible to their sensors thanks to adaptive camouflage that bent light and energy around the Wraith's hull. He had been tracking them for 6 hours, learning their patrol patterns and identifying weaknesses in their formation. The Zephyrians were exactly as predictable as he remembered. Following procedures that prioritized efficiency over security, the lead frigate was his primary target. A sleek vessel bristling with weapons but designed for conventional space warfare. Its shields could deflect direct energy attacks and its armor could withstand missile strikes. But the Zephyrians had never developed defenses against the kind of asymmetric assault that Marcus specialized in. They fought in terms of fleet engagements and orbital bombardments, not individual infiltrators who could strike from inside their defensive perimeter. Marcus began his approach vector, the Wraith sliding through space like a shadow among shadows. His ship's experimental propulsion system produced no energy signature that Imperial sensors could detect, allowing him to close to within a few hundred meters of the frigate's hull. This close, he could see Zephyrian crew members moving past windows in the ship's corridors, oblivious to the death that hung just outside their walls. The Wraith's docking clamps engaged with the frigate's emergency airlock, a connection so gentle that the Imperial ship's sensors registered it as a minor fluctuation in hull pressure. Marcus had performed this maneuver dozens of times during the border wars, turning enemy vessels into weapons against their own forces. The Zephyrians had never learned to guard against it because they couldn't imagine anyone being bold enough to attempt it. Marcus moved through the Wraith's airlock wearing his full combat armor, every system active and ready for battle. The pulse rifle in his hands was loaded with ammunition designed to penetrate Zephyrian scales and disrupt their nervous systems. His armor's stealth generators made him nearly invisible in the dim corridors of the Imperial ship, a ghost moving through their midst without triggering any alarms. The first Zephyrian crew member died without ever seeing his killer. The alien was conducting a routine maintenance check on an atmospheric processor when Marcus appeared behind him, a combat knife sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. The Zephyrian's death was silent and quick, his body carefully positioned to avoid detection by passing patrols. Marcus moved deeper into the ship, following memorized deck plans that the human military had compiled during years of conflict. Zephyrian vessel design was standardized across their fleet, making navigation simple for anyone who understood their construction principles. The ship's bridge was 12 decks up, protected by security checkpoints and armed guards who would never see him coming. He eliminated sentries one by one, each death swift and silent. The Zephyrians died believing they were alone, never realizing that a human assassin was moving through their ship like a plague of death. Marcus felt no satisfaction in their deaths, only cold efficiency. These aliens were obstacles between him and his real target, the officers who had ordered the attack on New Terra Colony. The bridge was a circular chamber dominated by a central command platform where Captain Voss reviewed shipping manifests on a holographic display. 8 crew members manned control stations around the room's perimeter, their attention focused on navigation data and sensor readings. They were discussing arrival schedules at their destination when Marcus appeared in their midst like a nightmare made flesh. The captain died first, Marcus's knife finding his heart before the Zephyrian could even register surprise. The bridge crew turned toward the commotion, reaching for weapons that would never clear their holsters. Marcus moved among them with the fluid grace of a predator, each motion economical and deadly. Pulse rifle fire cut through the air in precise bursts, dropping aliens where they stood. Within 30 seconds, the bridge was silent, except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Marcus stepped over the bodice to reach the command console, his armor's interfaces linking with the Imperial ship's computer networks. Years of intelligence work had given him access codes and system vulnerabilities that the Zephyrians didn't know were compromised. He downloaded everything: crew manifests, communication logs, shipping schedules, and most importantly, military command structures. The data revealed the chain of command that had authorized the attack on New Terra Colony, names and locations of the officers responsible for his son's deaths. Admiral Kresh, the fleet commander who had ordered the demonstration. Commander Thane, who had selected the target. Captain Zorak, who had personally fired the weapons that killed Tommy Jake. And Sam. Marcus uploaded a virus into the frigate's computer systems, a program designed to spread through the Imperial communication network and gather intelligence on military movements. Then he set charges throughout the ship's critical systems, turning the vessel into a bomb that would destroy the entire convoy. The merchant ships carried no weapons, but their deaths would send a message that nowhere in Zephyrian space was truly safe. He returned to the Wraith as the charges reached final countdown, his ship disengaging from the frigate just as the explosions began. The escort vessel disappeared in a ball of superheated plasma, its fusion reactor containment failing in a chain reaction that sent shockwaves through the convoy. The merchant ships tried to scatter, but they were too slow and too large to escape the expanding debris field, one by one. The cargo vessels died as wreckage punched through their hulls and secondary explosions tore them apart. 17 ships worth billions of credits became expanding clouds of metal and vaporized cargo, their destruction visible from light years away. Any Zephyrian forces in the area would see the flash and know that someone had declared war on the Galactic Empire. Marcus watched the destruction from a safe distance, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. The convoy had been carrying luxury goods to pampered Zephyrian nobles while human colonists lay dead on New Terra. Now those nobles would learn to do without their precious imports while he continued his campaign against the Empire. The data he had stolen pointed him toward his next target, a military supply depot where Admiral Kresh's fleet was scheduled to resupply. The admiral thought he was safe in his fortress, protected by weapons and soldiers. He was wrong. Marcus Chen was coming for him, and neither distance nor defenses would save him from a father's vengeance. Supply Station Omega-7 hung in the void between two dead stars, a massive fortress designed to service the Zephyrian Imperial fleet during extended campaigns. The station's armor plating could withstand direct assault from battleship weapons, while its defensive batteries could destroy attacking fleets before they reached weapons range. It was considered impregnable, a bastion of Imperial might that had never fallen to enemy attack. Admiral Kresh stood in the station's command center, reviewing reports of the convoy's destruction with growing unease. 17 ships had been obliterated by an unknown attacker who had left no trace of their identity or method. The escort frigate had simply exploded, taking the entire convoy with it in what appeared to be a catastrophic system failure. But Kresh had spent 40 years in military service, and he knew sabotage when he saw it. The admiral was a veteran of the border wars, a massive Zephyrion whose scaled hide bore scars from human weapons. He remembered the frustration of fighting an enemy who refused to engage in conventional warfare, who struck from shadows and vanished before retaliation could be organized. The humans had been beaten back eventually. But they had taught the Empire valuable lessons about the dangers of underestimating supposedly inferior species. "Double the patrols," he ordered his staff officers. "I want sensor sweeps every 10 minutes and fighter squadrons on constant alert. If there's a human strike force operating in this sector, I want them found and destroyed before they can threaten this station." What Admiral Kresh didn't know was that the threat was already inside his fortress. Marcus Chen had arrived 3 days earlier, his ship hidden in the station's own cargo bay disguised as a routine supply delivery. The Wraith's adaptive camouflage had fooled Imperial security scanners, while forged identification codes had gained him access to restricted areas throughout the facility. Marcus had spent those 3 days studying the station's layout and security procedures, moving through maintenance tunnels and service corridors like a ghost. His combat armor's stealth capabilities made him invisible to both sensors and visual observation, allowing him to map every critical system and identify key personnel. The Zephyrians never suspected that death was walking among them. Cataloging their weaknesses and planning their destruction, the station housed over 10,000 Imperial personnel, including Admiral Kresh's personal guard and an elite Marine battalion. They were the Empire's finest soldiers, equipped with advanced weapons and trained for close-quarters combat. But they were also creatures of routine, following predictable patterns that Marcus had been observing for days. Their strength was conventional military thinking, which was also their greatest weakness. Marcus began his assault in the station's power distribution center, a heavily shielded chamber deep in the facility's core. 2 guards stood watch outside the entrance, their weapons ready, but their attention focused on external threats rather than infiltration. They died without raising an alarm, Marcus's knife work quick and silent in the dimly lit corridor. Inside the power center, he placed his first set of charges among the fusion reactors that supplied energy to the station's defensive systems. The explosives were small but precisely positioned, designed to create cascading failures that would blind the fortress's sensors and disable its weapons. When the time came, Supply Station Omega-7 would be defenseless against attack. His next target was the communication array, a sprawling complex of transmitters and receivers that kept the station in contact with Imperial Command. Marcus moved through the facility's superstructure like a spider in its web, avoiding patrols and security checkpoints through paths that existed only in maintenance blueprints. The communication technicians never saw him coming, dying at their posts while their equipment was methodically destroyed. The station's senior officers were meeting in the Admiral's briefing room, discussing security measures and deployment schedules. Marcus watched them through surveillance cameras that he had quietly compromised, learning their names and positions. These were the architects of imperial policy, the beings who planned campaigns against human colonies and ordered demonstrations of superior firepower. Commander Thane was there, the same officer who had selected New Terra Colony as a target for the fleet's demonstration of authority. Zephyrion was younger than Admiral Kresh but equally ruthless. Known for his efficient execution of pacification operations, he had been promoted specifically for his success in terrorizing civilian populations, a career built on the suffering of innocents. Marcus felt cold satisfaction as he planned the commander's death. Thane would die slowly, painfully, learning what it felt like to be helpless before superior force. But first, the station's defenses had to be neutralized and its personnel eliminated. The Admiral would be last, saved for personal attention after his subordinates were dead. Moving through the station's lower levels, Marcus systematically destroyed critical infrastructure while eliminating key personnel. Life support technicians, security officers, Engineering specialists all died without warning as the human ghost walked among them. Each death brought him closer to the command level. Where his primary targets waited, the charges began detonating at precisely 0200 station time. A coordinated assault on the facility's most vulnerable systems. Power fluctuations cascaded through the station's grid as fusion reactors went offline, plunging entire sections into darkness. Emergency lighting activated throughout the complex, bathing corridors in ominous red, illumination that made shadows deeper and more threatening. Alarms blared as the station's automated systems detected multiple system failures. But the command crew's attempts to coordinate a response were hampered by the destruction of their communication networks. Admiral Kresh found himself commanding a fortress that had suddenly become deaf, blind, and helpless, cut off from both its external sensors and its internal security feeds. "Sabotage!" he snarled, his clawed hands gripping the command podium. "We have an infiltrator aboard. Seal all compartments and begin systematic searches. Find them before they can do more damage." But it was already too late. Marcus had spent 3 days preparing for this moment, placing explosives throughout the station's infrastructure and mapping every route to the command center. The Zephyrians were reacting to his attack rather than anticipating it, always one step behind a ghost who knew their fortress better than they did. As emergency teams rushed to contain the damage, Marcus began his final approach to the command level. Admiral Kresh and his officers were trapped in their briefing room, protected by heavy blast doors and an elite guard unit. They believed themselves safe behind layers of security and armored walls. They were wrong. Marcus Chen was coming for them, and no defense in the galaxy would save them from a father's vengeance. The Admiral would soon learn what happened when the Galactic Empire killed the wrong man's children. The command level of Supply Station Omega-7 had become a fortress within a fortress, sealed blast doors and emergency protocols turning the administrative section into an armored bunker. Admiral Kresh paced the central briefing room like a caged predator, his officers clustered around holographic displays that showed cascading system failures throughout the station. Emergency lighting cast harsh shadows across Zephyrian faces as damage reports flooded their remaining communication channels. "Sir, we've lost primary power to sectors 7 through 15, reported the station's chief engineer, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Fusion reactors 2 and 4 are completely offline, and the backup generators are failing one by one. Whoever is doing this knows our systems better than we do." Admiral Kresh's scarred hide rippled with frustrated rage. In 40 years of military service, he had never faced an enemy who could penetrate Imperial defenses so completely. The attacker was systematically dismantling the station's infrastructure, while remaining completely invisible to their security forces. It was like fighting a ghost, a nightmare that could strike anywhere without warning. Commander Thane stood near the tactical display, studying schematics of the station's layout with growing unease. "The sabotage is too precise," he observed. "Whoever this is has detailed knowledge of our construction standards and security protocols. This isn't random terrorism, it's a professional military operation." 20 meters below their feet, Marcus Chan moved through the station's superstructure like death incarnate. His combat armor's enhanced strength allowed him to tear through bulkheads that would stop conventional weapons, while his stealth generators made him invisible to both sensors and direct observation. He was following maintenance conduits that led directly to the command level, approaching his targets through routes that didn't officially exist on any blueprint. The elite guard unit protecting the command center consisted of 30 Imperial Marines, the finest soldiers the Zephyrian military could produce. They were positioned at every access point, armed with weapons capable of stopping armored vehicles and trained to coordinate their fire in perfect synchronization. Their commander, Captain Zorak, was the same officer who had personally fired the orbital strikes that killed Marcus's sons. Marcus emerged from a ventilation shaft directly behind the Marine checkpoint, his presence undetected until his knife found Captain Zorak's spine. The Zephyrian officer collapsed without a sound, neural pathways severed by precision blade work that left him paralyzed but conscious. Marcus wanted him to live long enough to understand what was happening, to feel the helplessness that Tommy, Jake, and Sam had experienced in their final moments. The other Marines reacted with trained efficiency, their weapons tracking toward the source of the attack. But Marcus was already moving, his enhanced reflexes carrying him through their formation like a tornado of death. Pulse rifle fire filled the corridor as he struck again and again, each shot precisely placed to penetrate Zephyrian anatomy at its most vulnerable points. The battle lasted less than 30 seconds. When the weapons fire stopped, 30 elite Imperial Marines lay dead in the corridor while their paralyzed commander watched helplessly from the floor. Marcus knelt beside Captain Zorak, his helmet speakers activated so the dying Zephyrian could hear his words clearly. "You killed 3 boys on New Terra Colony," Marcus said, his voice cold and emotionless. Tommy Chung, age 18. Jake and Sam Chung, both 16. They were harvesting grain when you murdered them from orbit. "Do you remember them, Captain?" Zorak's eyes widened with recognition and terror. The orbital bombardment had been routine, just another demonstration of Imperial power against defiant human colonists. He had never considered that the targets might have families, might be individual beings with names and lives rather than anonymous statistics on a casualty report. "Their father is here to collect payment for their lives," Marcus continued, drawing his sidearm. "Tell me about Admiral Kresh. Tell me about the order to attack New Terra. Tell me everything, and I'll make your death quick." The paralyzed officer began talking, fear loosening his tongue as he provided details about the fleet command structure and the decision-making process that had led to the colony's destruction. Marcus recorded everything, building a complete picture of the chain of responsibility that had resulted in his son's deaths. Each name, each authorization, each casual decision to commit genocide was carefully cataloged for future reference. When Captain Zorak finished his confession, Marcus kept his promise and ended the alien's life with a single precise shot. Then he turned toward the blast doors that protected the command center, studying their construction with professional interest. The barriers were designed to withstand direct hits from ship weapons, but they had never been tested against an infiltrator who approached from inside the station's own structure. The charges Marcus placed were small but incredibly sophisticated, shaped explosives that focused their energy in precisely calculated directions. The blast doors didn't just fail, they were surgically removed from their mountings and hurled into the command center like massive projectiles. Admiral Kresh and his staff barely had time to register the explosion before tons of armored metal crashed into their briefing room. Marcus stepped through the smoking doorway, wearing full combat armor, his weapons trained on the surviving Imperial officers. Admiral Kresh was trapped beneath a section of blast door, his legs crushed but his upper body free. Commander Thane had been thrown against a wall by the explosion, his left arm hanging at an unnatural angle. 3 other staff officers cowered behind overturned furniture, their weapons forgotten in the chaos. "Admiral Kresh," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's smoke and dust. "I am Marcus Chin, formerly Gunnery Sergeant, 3rd Human Marine Expeditionary Force. You ordered the destruction of New Terra Colony. You killed my children. I am here to balance the scales." The Admiral stared up at the armored figure with a mixture of recognition and disbelief. He remembered the name from intelligence reports during the border wars, the human ghost who had terrorized Imperial installations throughout the conflict. Ghost Walker had been declared dead after the ceasefire, killed in action during humanity's retreat from contested space. But here he stood, very much alive and driven by purposes that made him more dangerous than any military unit. "You're one man," Admiral Kresh gasped, pain making his voice weak. "One human against the entire Galactic Empire. You cannot win this war." Marcus raised his weapon, the barrel centered on the Admiral's head. "I'm not trying to win a war," he replied. "I'm collecting a debt." New Terra Colony had 3,000 human colonists. I've killed perhaps 100 Zephyrians so far. I have a long way to go before the balance is restored. The execution was swift and final, Admiral Kresh dying with the knowledge that his casual genocide had awakened something terrible. Marcus turned to the surviving officers, his helmet recording their faces and voices as they begged for mercy. None would be shown. These were the beings who had planned the attack on New Terra, who had selected civilian targets and authorized mass murder. Commander Thane was last, saved for special attention as the officer who had specifically recommended human colonies for demonstration operations. Marcus made sure he understood exactly why he was dying, exactly whose children he had helped murder. Before ending his life with the same cold efficiency that had characterized the orbital bombardment. With the station's command structure eliminated, Marcus began the final phase of his assault. The charges he had placed throughout the facility's infrastructure were set to detonate in sequence, turning Supply Station Omega-7 into the largest explosion in the sector's history. Any Imperial forces investigating the destruction would find no survivors, no witnesses, and no explanation beyond the message. Marcus left in the station's computer systems. The Galactic Empire had killed 3 human boys. Now they would learn what happened when they murdered the children of Marcus Chun. The destruction of Supply Station Omega-7 sent shockwaves throughout the Galactic Empire that had nothing to do with the massive explosion visible from 3 star systems away. Within hours of the station's annihilation, every major Imperial fleet commander received classified briefings about the return of Ghostwalker, the human specter they thought had died with the border wars. Panic spread through the Zephyrian command structure like a virus as officers realized they were facing an enemy who fought without rules. Mercy or fear, Marcus Chun watched the station's death from the safety of deep space, the Wraith's sensors recording the expanding fireball for future analysis. 10,000 Imperial personnel had died in the explosion, including some of the Empire's most experienced fleet officers. The military infrastructure that supported 3 entire battle groups had been reduced to drifting wreckage and superheated gas. It was a significant blow to Zephyrian capabilities, but more importantly, it was a message that could be seen across the galaxy. The Empire's response was swift and predictable. Within days, Imperial security forces had imposed martial law across a dozen star systems, conducting house-to-house searches for human insurgents who didn't exist. Zephyrian commanders pulled their fleets back from forward positions, concentrating their forces around core worlds in defensive formations that made them powerful but inflexible. They were reacting exactly as Marcus had hoped, turning their strength into weakness through fear and paranoia. But the real prize was the intelligence data he had extracted from Admiral Kresh's personal files before destroying the station. The Admiral's computer contained detailed records of every demonstration operation conducted against human settlements over the past 5 years. Colony after colony had been targeted for destruction, their populations exterminated to send messages about Imperial supremacy. The scale of the genocide was staggering, with over 50,000 human civilians murdered in carefully orchestrated attacks. Each operation had been planned and authorized by a specific group of Imperial officers, their names and locations carefully documented in Admiral Kresh's meticulous records. Marcus now had a comprehensive target list that would keep him busy. For years, a catalog of war criminals who had built their careers on the systematic murder of innocents. They thought themselves safe in their positions of power, protected by rank and distance from the consequences of their orders. They were wrong. Marcus Chen was coming for all of them, and he would not stop until every officer responsible for human genocide was dead. The destruction of Supply Station Omega-7 had been a warning shot, a demonstration that nowhere in Imperial space was truly secure. Now the real hunt would begin, a campaign of targeted assassination that would decapitate the Zephyrian military leadership, one officer at a time. His first priority was Admiral Vex, the architect of the pacification protocol that had authorized attacks on civilian targets. The Zephyrian was currently stationed at Fortress Prime, the Empire's most heavily defended naval base in the core systems. The facility was protected by orbital defense platforms, energy shields, and a full battle fleet that could destroy most attacking forces before they reached weapons range. It was considered absolutely impregnable, which made it the perfect target for Ghostwalker's particular talents. Marcus spent weeks studying Fortress Prime from a distance. using long-range sensors and intelligence networks to map every detail of its defenses. The base was indeed formidable, but it had been designed to repel conventional military attacks rather than infiltration by a single operator. Its very strength created blind spots and vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone who understood the psychology of fortress warfare. The key was patience and misdirection. Marcus began his approach by attacking Imperial supply lines throughout the sector, hitting convoys and installations with calculated precision. Each strike was designed to draw attention and resources away from Fortress Prime, forcing the Zephyrians to disperse their forces in pursuit of a ghost they could never catch. The base's garrison was gradually reduced as ships were reassigned to hunt for the elusive human terrorist. While the Empire's attention was focused on hunting shadows, Marcus infiltrated Fortress Prime through the most obvious route possible, the front door. The Wraith approached the naval base disguised as a diplomatic courier, its forged identification, codes and falsified cargo manifest convincing Imperial security that it carried important communications from the outer sectors. The guards who inspected the ship found nothing suspicious because Marcus had hidden in a specially designed compartment that sensors couldn't detect. Once inside the fortress, Marcus began the delicate process of moving through its massive structure without triggering security alerts. Fortress Prime housed over 100,000 Imperial personnel across multiple levels and sections, creating a complex environment where a careful infiltrator could remain undetected for extended periods. His combat armor's stealth capabilities made him effectively invisible, while his knowledge of Zephyrian construction standards allowed him to navigate through maintenance areas and service corridors. Admiral Vex lived in luxury quarters near the fortress's command center, surrounded by automated defenses and elite bodyguards who had never failed to protect their charges. The Zephyrian had built his career on the systematic extermination of human colonies, personally authorizing attacks that had killed thousands of civilians. He slept peacefully each night, secure in the knowledge that his victims were light years away, and his fortress was impregnable. Marcus spent 3 days studying the Admiral's routines and security arrangements, learning every detail of his personal habits. Vex was a creature of precise schedules, following the same patterns each day with military punctuality. His bodyguards were professionals, but they were defending against conventional threats rather than an infiltrator who could appear inside their defensive perimeter without warning. The assassination took place during the Admiral's private dinner, a daily ritual conducted in his personal quarters while his guards waited outside. Marcus appeared in the dining room like a nightmare materializing from shadow, his presence undetected until he spoke the Admiral's name. Vex looked up from his meal to see Death standing beside his table, armored and armed with weapons that could penetrate any defense. "Admiral Vex," Marcus said, his voice carrying the cold finality of a death sentence. "I am Marcus Chun, you authorized the murder of my children on New Terra Colony, along with thousands of other human civilians across 50 different worlds. I am here to collect payment for their lives." The Admiral's death was neither quick nor merciful. Marcus had learned techniques during his years of service that could extract information while inflicting maximum suffering, methods that the Zephyrians themselves had developed for interrogating human prisoners. Vex experienced every form of pain his victims had endured, understanding at last what it felt like to be helpless before superior force. When the Admiral finally died, Marcus left his body displayed in the quarters as a message for anyone who might find him. Then he began planting charges throughout Fortress Prime's critical systems, turning the Empire's greatest naval base into a weapon against itself. The explosions would destroy not just the facility, but also the entire battle fleet docked at its berths, eliminating a significant portion of Imperial naval strength in a single devastating blow. As Marcus prepared to escape in the chaos of the fortress's destruction, he reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since his son's deaths. The empire that had seemed invincible was revealing itself to be vulnerable, dependent on the myth of its own supremacy rather than actual strength. Fear was spreading through Imperial space like wildfire, carried by reports of Ghostwalker's return and the systematic elimination of senior officers. The Zephyrians were beginning to understand what humans had known for millennia: That even the mightiest empire could fall if its enemies were patient, determined, and absolutely without mercy. Marcus Chen was teaching them this lesson, one dead admiral at a time, and he was far from finished with their education.